Young man works as a janitor in a bank. Humiliated by his boss, who constantly looks down on him and makes fun of his disability, he decides to rob the bank and devises an ingenious plan to do it. The story begins on a rural road at night. A group of high school teenagers happily drive to a party in a fast car, speeding down the empty road. Chris, the cocky owner of the car, tries to impress his girlfriend, Kelly, by turning off the car's headlights so that she can look at the glowing fireflies flying all around them. They enjoy the beautiful scene, unaware of the danger ahead. A second later, Chris turns the lights back on, only to see a huge combine right before crashing into it. The horrific car accident cost the lives of 2 teenagers that were sitting in the back. Chris and Kelly survived the crash but were gravely injured. 4 years later, Chris is struggling with his life, barely surviving the terrible car crash. He received a severe brain injury that left him mentally impaired. Chris suffers from anterograde amnesia, meaning that he remembers his life before the accident but is unable to form new long-term memories, causing him to forget everything that he learns. Because of his condition, Chris struggles with even the most basic everyday tasks, like shaving or making coffee. Every day, he takes medication and writes down everything that he does during the day in a notebook. During his recovery process, Chris takes cognitive therapy classes at a life skills center, attempting to rebuild his life from scratch. He often watches Kelly when she walks to work nearby. The two haven't spoken since the crash because Kelly hates him for what happened. Chris lives with a roommate, an older blind man named Lewis, who maintains a cheerful attitude despite his disability. Lewis helps Chris deal with his emotional problems, becoming a father figure in his life. After dinner with Lewis, Chris drives to his job in a small town called Noel. He works night shifts as a janitor in a bank. Chris has an aspiration to get a job as a teller at the bank. He tries to convince the bank's manager, Mr. Tuttle, to give him a chance, but Tuttle rudely refuses, making fun of Chris's inability to remember things. Humiliated by the awkward conversation, Chris goes back to his job of cleaning the bank. Reminiscing about his past as an aspiring hockey player in high school, he shoots soap bars into a trash basket with a mop. Chris is saddened, realizing that things will never be the same. He is unaware that he's being watched by a ruthless gang that is planning a robbery of this bank. Depressed by work, Chris goes to a bar for a drink. He is recognized by Gary, a young man who used to attend the same high school as Chris. Seeing that the bartender is trying to cheat Chris on his change, Gary interferes and forces the bartender to give the money back and apologize. The two become friends and have a short conversation, during which Chris tells Gary about his condition. Gary walks away to join his friends, leaving a confused Chris wondering about the true motives of his new acquaintance. Day after day, Chris goes on with his life as usual. On Thanksgiving, he and Lewis have dinner with Chris's family in their luxurious mansion. They are extremely wealthy, and each brag about their individual successes, making Chris feel completely worthless compared to his successful siblings and parents. Every night during work, Chris is visited by his friend Ted, a local sheriff's deputy who often shares donuts with him. Later at the bar, Chris gets acquainted with Louvely, a woman from Gary's group. She expresses interest in Chris, saying that she used to watch him play hockey in high school. Attracted to each other, they drive to her place where they become intimate. Spending time with Gary after work, Chris gets invited to a party at his farm. Arriving there, he is greeted by Louvely. The two kiss passionately. Gary introduces Chris to his friends, a rather questionable group of characters. Chris notices an older man in shades who harasses the old owner of the house. He can't shake the feeling that something is wrong with these people, but once he is seduced by Louvely, he forgets all about his suspicions. Later at night, Chris wakes up in the living room, confused about what's going on. He descends to the basement, where he finds Gary and his crew talking about something in great detail. Looking at a board, Chris notices photos of different banks. Seeing the pictures of himself throws him into a panic. Not knowing Gary's true intentions, he asks why Gary has these pictures. Without further delay, Gary confesses that he and his crew are going to rob one of these banks, preferably the one where Chris works, since he has access to the building. That is why Gary befriended him in the first place. Gary asks him to help them rob the bank. He cleverly manipulates the insecure and naive Chris, saying that considering the way life treated him in the past, his car accident, his condition, the pain he goes through at his demeaning job, the way his family treats him, he has every right to steal back what is rightfully his. Moved by these words, Chris says that he will think about it. He leaves the farm, not realizing that Gary used Louvely, one of his girlfriends, to seduce him earlier. Days go by, Chris becomes increasingly annoyed by every little thing that goes wrong in his life. It is especially frustrating to him that people treat him like a child incapable of living the life of an adult man. Trying to change their lives, Chris and Lewis go to the bank and apply for a $30,000 business loan. They have an idea to open a restaurant at an old gas station. The bank manager laughs at their idea and refuses the loan. Chris asks his father for the money but gets the same answer. Even when he asks his rich father for a relatively small amount, like $1,000, he still refuses, clearly not trusting his mentally impaired son with money. The brutal conversation with his father was the final straw that pushed Chris over the edge. The next morning, Chris wakes up a different person. His mind is made up. He is going to help Gary's crew execute the robbery. They monitor the movement of armored trucks arriving at the Knoll Bank. Chris and Gary buy an acetylene tank for a cutting torch. Later, they buy an old car at a parking lot to use it as the getaway vehicle for the robbery. One night at work, Chris takes photos of the vault door with his camera. He is terrified to hear Ted knocking on the door. In a panic, Chris quickly hides the camera and lets the policeman inside. Ted asks him why he was taking pictures. Chris makes up an excuse saying he just wanted to show his parents where he works. He is very nervous. For a second, it seems like Ted can see through his lies, but he could never imagine what was really going on. Ted cheerfully invites Chris to stand in front of the vault door and takes a picture of him in front of it. Analyzing the photos, the robbers devise a plan for the heist. Chris is assigned to act as a lookout and is supposed to warn the crew if Deputy Ted approaches the bank and talk with him if necessary. Exchanging the expensive suit his family gave him earlier, Chris buys himself a leather jacket. Lewis is getting suspicious about the sudden relationship between Chris and Lovely, who spend all their time together. One night, when she was at their house, Lewis confronts her about it, saying he doesn't believe that her interest in Chris is genuine. She denies the accusations, but he can clearly see that she is manipulating his best friend. The next day, Chris observes a large shipment of cash being delivered to the Knoll Bank and informs the crew. At night, he cleans the bank and is visited by Ted as usual. But this time, Chris rudely refuses to take Ted's donuts, saying he doesn't need his charity. Policeman is quite confused by this strange reaction, unaware that Chris is trying to make him stop his night visits because of the robbery. Even though Lovely was only supposed to trick Chris into joining the robbery, she developed real feelings for him. Feeling guilty about what she did to him, Lovely leaves Gary and departs in a taxi. She sees Chris arriving at her house and looking for her. Despite her feelings for him, she decides to leave without saying goodbye. On the night of the robbery, Chris is cleaning the bank when he notices Gary's crew passing by in the getaway car. Tuttle suddenly starts a conversation with Chris. Chris is alarmed, thinking that the manager is aware of their intentions to rob the bank, but it's the opposite. Tuttle has noticed a new confidence in Chris, his new clothes, and the way he carries himself. Impressed with this transformation, Tuttle agrees to give Chris a job as a teller at the bank. The news hits Chris like a bag of rocks. He now realizes that he's made a huge mistake. In a panic, he calls Lewis and asks him for help, but it's already too late as Gary's crew has arrived. Chris lets them in but says that he wants nothing to do with the robbery and just wants to walk away. Gary can't allow that. He suddenly punches Chris and forces him to participate in the heist against his wishes. Chris reluctantly stands on the lookout while the robbers use a blowtorch to cut through the vault door. The getaway driver in the car notices a police car approaching the bank. It's Ted. While the rest hide, Gary threatens Chris with a revolver and orders him to talk to the policeman like nothing is out of the ordinary. When Ted comes up to the door, they have a quick chat, during which Ted informs Chris that he's being reassigned to another town, so he will not be coming here anymore. Chris apologizes for his rude behavior the other night, and the two say goodbye. Ted gets back in his car and drives away, unaware that Chris is being held hostage. Once the policeman has left, robbers go back to breaking into the vault. Chris is devastated by the realization of what he's gotten himself into. Driving away, Ted stops at the donut shop. He decides that he can't possibly leave without buying Chris donuts one last time. Meanwhile, the robbers have breached the vault door, creating a hole in the center. Looking inside, they find millions of dollars in cash. Gary orders Chris to carry the money out of the vault. He insists that Chris doesn't use gloves, clearly intending to frame the janitor for the robbery. Threatened at gunpoint, Chris reluctantly complies and hands them stacks of cash through the hole in the door. Once all the money is retrieved, robbers carry the bags to their getaway car. They are about to leave when a police car suddenly arrives on the road ahead. Ted has come back. He rushes to the bank and knocks on the door. Robbers quickly hide behind the walls, hoping that the annoying cop will leave soon. But Ted realizes that something is clearly wrong because Chris would never leave the bank without hiding his mop and turning off the lights in the bank. Looking inside, Ted notices the blowtorch on the floor and Gary's reflection in the window. In horror, he steps away from the window, petrified by fear. The robbers quickly realize that he is onto them. The older man in shades walks out and opens fire on the policeman. Luckily, he misses, giving Ted a chance to take cover and draw his weapon. A fierce shootout ensues, during which Ted skillfully guns down two robbers and wounds Gary. In an adrenaline rush, Ted confidently walks inside the bank and orders the rest to surrender, only to be shot in the back by Bone, a ruthless robber in shades. Bone finishes off the policeman and walks to the vault where he discovers to his surprise that Ted isn't there. Meanwhile, Ted escapes in a hurry. He tries to leave in his own car but doesn't have the keys, as he often forgets them in ignition, so he steals the robber's getaway car, which has the bags with money in it. This enraged Gary. He and Bone run out of the bank and start the pursuit. Chris is driving at high speed through a dark country road with his car's headlights switched off. He reminisces about the car accident that left him mentally impaired. His fast driving catches the attention of a police cruiser. Chris reluctantly pulls over to the side of the road. Cop gets out and demands his license and registration, pointing out that Chris was driving with his lights off. Chris goes into a full panic, saying that people died because of him. The policeman knows who he is as he heard about the car accident, so he assumes that Chris is talking about killing his friends during that crash. From his point of view, it looks like Chris is trying to end his life by driving recklessly because of the guilt he feels over what happened on that night. Feeling sorry for the poor boy, the cop lets him go with a warning. Chris drives to a nearby farm and stops the car. Looking in the back, he finds bags of stolen money and realizes that the remaining robbers are going to hunt him down. Chris goes back home, not having anywhere else to go. He parks the car outside and looks into his window where he sees a light. Since Lewis is blind, he has no need for lights. Chris realizes that the robbers are in the apartment, probably holding Lewis hostage. He calls Lewis and asks him if everything is okay. Threatened at gunpoint, Lewis claims that everything is fine, but Chris points out the details about the lights uncovering the deception. Meanwhile, Bone comes out of the building holding a shotgun. Seeing this, Chris quickly escapes in the car. He drives to his family's mansion and sneaks inside. Intending to rescue Lewis from Gary and Bone, he takes a shotgun out of his father's cabinet and devises a plan to take down the robbers. He hides the gun in one of the money bags and buries them in a secret place, an inconspicuous ditch near the crossroad. Chris calls Gary. Despite the robbers' threats to kill Lewis, Chris tells Gary that he has hidden the money and will only give them the location if they bring Lewis alive and well to a public place near the Christmas tree at 6 p.m. Chris drives to the meeting. He arrives early and has to wait. His mind starts to wander. Chris's attention is drawn to Kelly walking into the building nearby. Since he has the time, Chris follows her to the top floor where the two finally reunite. Kelly reveals that she lost her leg during the accident and now uses a prosthetic. Despite what happened, she is no longer mad at Chris. In an unexpected twist, it is revealed that it was all a dream. Waiting for the robbers, Chris simply fell asleep. He awakens only to find Bone pointing a gun at him. The henchman brings him to Gary and Lewis. Chris claims he does not remember where the money is. Trying to force him to talk, Bone beats him up viciously. Gary stops the beating, pointing out that Chris is probably telling the truth. He really doesn't remember, but he probably wrote the location in his notebook. So they soon find out about the ditch at the crossroads. They arrive at the crossroads where Chris buried the money and force him to dig it up from the ditch. Bone stands over his shoulder, watching closely his every move. Since Gary still hasn't treated the wound he received at the bank earlier, his condition deteriorates rapidly. When Chris uncovers the money bags, he notices that one of them is marked with a black ribbon. Realizing that this bag contains the shotgun, he gives Bone the other one first. Bone slowly carries it to the car. He takes Lewis out of the vehicle, intending to execute him along with Chris. Seeing this, Chris lifts the bag and shoots Bone with a hidden shotgun right through the bag. The shotgun shell also grazes the already gravely wounded Gary, knocking the revolver out of his hand. Gary dies shortly afterward, unable to use his inhaler. Chris goes back to the bank and returns the stolen money. FBI agents arrive at the scene and conduct an investigation. Chris tells them the truth about everything that happened, expecting to be arrested and tried for his part in the robbery. But the security camera footage shows the robbers forcing Chris to help them at gunpoint, so the FBI agents decide that he wasn't responsible for his actions due to his mental condition. Sometime later, Chris and Lewis open the restaurant of their dreams with a business loan given by Tuttle out of gratitude for Chris's heroic actions in saving the bank. Chris reconciles with his father, who has grown to realize that he was wrong about his son's abilities. Chris slowly rebuilds his life, learning new skills every day. He hopes that one day he will have the courage to talk to Kelly in real life, just like he did in his dreams, and apologize for what he did to her. Hopefully, she will forgive him. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Movie Fist channel so you don't miss out on interesting movie plots.